sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Often when I talk with people who have lived through the war, I'm thinking particularly, of course, of the Second World War, they often say to me, and as they recount those times which they lived through, that they would often queue for whatever it was, and when you join the queue, they would often say, "What is it we're queuing for?" If there was a queue, you joined it. At that time, when the country was locked in not only mortal combat, but in a terrible, terrible war, the nation did its best to keep going, to keep the home fires burning, as we say. And it was all because of what was happening in Europe. But at that time, of course, the conflict was brought to our own doorstep. And this year is the 70th anniversary of the Battle of Britain. And those of you who watched the service of Remembrance last night on the television at the Royal Albert Hall, it was the Royal Air Force which featured highly in last night's proceedings. But today I want to focus on the work of the Merchant Navy. The Allied Merchant Navy was manned by sailors from Great Britain and the many nations which made up the British Empire, now of course the British Commonwealth. In addition, countries such as Russia, the United States and China, which became allies of Britain, were also members of the Allied Merchant Navy. And other European countries like Poland, Greece and Norway, which came under German occupation, or Asian nations like the Philippines, which were overrun by Japan, were also participants, and they too did their bit. Along with the problems involving the detecting of the presence of U-boats, it was the Allies, the Merchant Navy, which suffered many, many casualties. The merchant seamen faced the same dangers of war as the regular armed forces, but they did so as non-military citizens or civilians. Their merchant ships were peacetime vessels which, even if fitted with guns of defence, were not designed to withstand an enemy attack. And the job of the Allied Merchant Navy was to carry vital troops, food, fuel and equipment to wherever they were needed in the fight against the Axis alliance of Germany, Italy and Japan. And although the Allied Merchant Navy participated in all the theatres of war, it is now generally accepted by many historians that their most crucial struggle was the Battle of the Atlantic. The battle which began on the 3rd of September 1939, when the British passenger liner, the Athenia, was torpedoed by a German U-boat, and it continued until Germany surrendered on May the 7th, 1945. So we can see that the great effort of the merchant seamen was such that throughout the course of the war, it was their work which enabled us back at home to keep the home fires burning. Once torpedoed, the odds of a merchant seaman surviving and being rescued were very poor indeed. Those who were not killed outright in the explosion were often badly injured. Many drowned, suffocated by oil, and paralysed from the cold of the frigid North Atlantic waters. Others who did manage to make it to a lifeboat or raft were often left behind, as it was too dangerous for another ship to stop and to pick Britain began to provide specially outfitted vessels called rescue ships, which, when available, travelled behind a convoy to pick up survivors. The little ships had an incredibly dangerous job, for they had to stop dead in the water to perform a rescue, and that meant that they provided an ideal target, of course, for the enemy. These brave naval escorts also did their best to help in rescue efforts, but their first priority was to try to locate the U-boats and prevent any further torpedoings. These harrowing conditions meant that during some periods of the war, less than half of all merchant seamen survived the sinking of their ships. In the early years of the war, so many merchant ships were sunk that the losses became almost unsustainable. Merchant ships were being sunk faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. And even in 1942, after the United States, under the leadership of President Roosevelt, was drawn into the war, the situation actually worsened. And so we can begin to see that contribution, which has often gone overlooked in the acts of remembrance, the contribution which was made by the Allied Merchant Navy. But I know many men who served in the Merchant Navy, and I know that it was because of the kind of men that they were that they wouldn't want to be recorded in the way that the other services are recorded and commemorated. It was because of the kind of men that they were that they didn't want a fuss. We must remember them in the same way that we remember the gallant people of the Royal Navy and the Land Forces and the Royal Air Force. They played their part in just the same way as everybody else played their part, and perhaps it was their vulnerability that makes them unique and special and shine out. Where would we be without the contribution of the Merchant Navy? I shudder to think. We're here today because of the sacrifice of many, not only merchant seamen, but all who gave their lives in those days, and those on active service today, those in the Merchant Navy of today. Their work is just as perilous, and their work is still dangerous as they go through difficult waters to bring us what we enjoy today on the shelves of the supermarkets and in other places. But today is a day of remembrance, when we remember all who gave their lives in conflict, both in the First World War, the Second World War, and in the many conflicts since. But today, as a parish, we give special thanks and remember the unique contribution of the Allied Merchant Navy. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. The going down of the sun in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. For they who go down to the sea in ships, who occupy their business in great waters, these men have seen the glory of the Lord and his wonders.